Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be with you here today. And I want to share with you some of the work we're doing on cities, a Senseable City Lab. First of all, why do we look at cities? Just 4 numbers to highlight the importance of cities: 2, 50, 75, and 80. Cities are only 2% of the surface of the planet, but they're 50%, actually a little over 50% of the population now. They're 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable, that can be a big deal globally. And what can we do today? Well, today is a very interesting time because we are seeing a convergence of digital and physical. We are seeing that in many fields. If you think about production, it's about Industry 4.0. But if you think about cities, it's what people call smart or sensible cities. It's about the convergence of bits and atoms with us in the middle. And that is producing a huge amount of data, and then we can use this data to better understand cities and change the way they work. So if you look at big data, there's many statistics. A lot of this data is produced in cities. For instance, in 2015, just one of the many things you can see, mankind produced as much information as was created in all previous years of human civilization. So there's many other definitions you can use. Actually, I quite like one by Professor Mike Batty at UCL, who says big data is what you cannot put in an Excel spreadsheet. And I quite like it because it's quite profound that you usually need new tools when you got big data to store it, to analyze it, and so on. And so I want to share with you some example of big data in cities. For instance, today we can look at a city like this. That's a visualization of Lisbon. It was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was done by Pedro Cruz from our lab at MIT. And this Lisbon capture using billions of data points collected from the taxi and the mobility network in the city. Now, the same data in New York shows you something like this. That's similar. It's every pick-up and drop-off. That's JFK Airport in New York. If you zoom out, JFK is down there. You see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. I'll tell you a little story about when we got the data. The data was made accessible by Mike Bloomberg when he was mayor of New York. And as you know, Mike Bloomberg created a giant company, Bloomberg, using data. And so I remember in his office, he had a little sign. And the sign went, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And so what he did as mayor of New York was actually take a lot of data and make it accessible to many people. In this case, we managed to get hold of all this information from the Taxi and Limousine Commission. And then we started asking different questions. The first question we asked was the following. If you look at that between those 2 points in Manhattan, you got hundreds of thousands of trips connecting them in the course of the year. How many of those trips could potentially be shared? Here's the idea. So that was the idea. The question is, how do you measure it mathematically? And so, again, when you got big data, sometimes you need to develop new mathematical tools to analyze it. We developed something we call shareability network. Actually, it resulted in a patent by MIT that really looks at all these trips to see how we can optimize and combine them in an optimal way. And what we realized was quite interesting, that in New York, you could actually take everybody to destination when they need to be there, give or take a couple of minutes. But if people are ready to share mobility with 40% less vehicles than what you have today. Now, 2 interesting things happened when the results came out. This was a few years ago. The first one is that the results came to the attention of Uber. And since then started a collaboration between MIT and Uber. And as you might know, Uber Pool does exactly this. Allows two people going more or less in the same direction to share mobility. Uber Pool didn't exist before. The other thing that's interesting is that when the results came out, actually, there were a few reviews, including one in the New York Times. In the Times, journalists said, well, that's interesting academic research, but New Yorkers really don't want to share. Well, it turns out that that is not the case. Turns out that now that we are using a lot of data by Uber and analyzing with Uber, then Uber Pool has been a big success. In San Francisco, over 50% of all trips by Uber every day are done by Uber Pool, which means two people going more or less in the same direction, sharing the car, which is one less car on the road, which is less congestion, less energy consumption, and less pollution. Now, there's some research from just a few months ago, last May, that we did using the same data set. And here we ask a different question. Imagine, all the trips you need to satisfy in a big city, such as New York. What could be the minimum fleet we need tomorrow with autonomous cars? Cars that give a lift to one person and then another person. Here's a video. So again, the story, we get data, we can use data to better understand the city, but also then to understand how we can make it work in a different way. For instance, in this case, about mobility. But something else interesting is happening with mobility in cars is that the car is becoming a little bit like that. It's becoming like a computer on wheels. That's a map that shows you all of the sensors we got on a car today, and they collect plenty of information about the driver, about the city, about the engine itself. And then you can use the car as a sensing platform. So that's some of the research we've been doing about how the car can tell us a lot of things about the city. Or for instance, about bridges. And this actually was just published a few months ago before this happened. It was a big bridge collapse in Europe earlier this year. But we've seen other examples. This was the Tacoma Bridge, and that went into vibration and collapsed. In Boston, this bridge didn't collapse, but actually they realized it had big structural issues and was closed over the past few years with a huge cost to the government in order to be totally refurbished and redone. And so today, the only way we can actually monitor a bridge is by putting sensor, as you see to the left, or by sending people to look at the bridge. And what you want to measure from the sensors is this kind of structural fingerprint about vibrations. Vibrations tell you a lot about the structural conditions of the bridge. But the ways we do it today are very expensive. If you go and put sensors, that can cost you anything between $50,000 or $100,000 or $500,000 per year per bridge. So it's quite a lot of money if you had to scale it up across the United States. So the idea was, what about using the sensor in the car? And we use accelerometers in the car, plus little accelerometers that we tried, both in smartphones and also professional accelerometers, as the one you see over there, with the yellow box, the orange box. And we started monitoring the Golden Gate because the Golden Gate is studied very, very well. So we said, let's start from that and look at the information. We also collected with Uber a lot of data from accelerometers that go on and off the Golden Gate. We also sent a team, an MIT team on the Golden Gate. They went back and forth 100 times until when they were stopped by the police. And so anyway, they collected all this information. It turns out, and I will not get into the detail, the technical details of the paper, that you can actually look at the vibration from this information. So if tomorrow we were to install this type of algorithms on little apps, think about the apps of Didi, of Uber, or Lyft, or similar company, and then automatically we'll be able to scan all of the infrastructure of a country with very little cost. Then if we see some problems, we might still want to put more sophisticated sensor, but it's a first scan. Like when you go to the doctor, they measure your temperature, your blood pressure, and then you can actually go and do an MRI, but only when you need it. A couple of final things to close. The sensor like that has also been added to cars. That's called a LiDAR. It does something like this, a three-dimensional scan of the city. You feed it into AI, and the car drives itself. And again, when that happens, many things change in the city in terms of mobility. For instance, this. when everything will be self-driving, perhaps we will not need traffic lights anymore. It's a well-known traffic light, and as you know, traffic lights appear on our roads when cars appear on our roads. But if you've got an intelligent system where every car knows where it is and where all the other cars are, you don't need to stop anymore. You can keep on going, just avoiding collisions. I would recommend you don't try it yet. I showed this video in Naples, and they told me, so what is new here? Now, I'm Italian, so I can make such politically incorrect jokes, but a former Italian minister corroborated this by saying that in Milan, traffic lights are instructions. In Rome, there are suggestions. In Naples, there are Christmas decorations. So again, when you look at the intersection, it seems very simple, but mathematically becomes quite interesting. You've got many trajectories. So in this paper, we looked at queuing theory. We tried to extend it in order to look at the problem of an intersection. And what you see here is actually part of the work we're doing now in Singapore. It's a real intersection in Singapore. What you see is the same number of cars to the left and to the, same number of cars arriving to the intersection. And in one case, their intersection is managed using the most sophisticated traffic light system we have today. And the other case is managed using a slot-based system, again, similar to what you have in airports. And if you look at this, look at the difference in terms of delays and cars waiting at the top and at the bottom, just by changing the way we manage the intersection. And intersection is interesting because usually it's the bottleneck. It's where you got two flows competing for the same real estate. So if you can fix the intersection, then automatically we fix a lot of issues about the entire city. And just a few images to finish. That's actually something that started from our research at MIT, but then was developed outside as a complement. Is the design of one of the tallest buildings in Singapore that we've been doing. And in this building, I will not tell you about the architecture. It has a tropical forest in the middle and a few other things. But the key thing is that here the city still wanted to build a lot of parking spaces. But with self-driving, we might need much less parking spaces tomorrow. The reason is that today the car is parked 95% of the time and only used 5%. If we change that with self-driving cars, we need much less parking. So what we did was actually change the floor-to-ceiling height in order to make the parking, yes, we build it today, we have to build it, but we make it flexible and convertible. So we change the floor-to-ceiling height, we move all the ramps outside, we make the structure inside something that can be easily converted. So the idea that basically we can take that infrastructure and tomorrow when technology might change, not demolish it, but keep on using it in a different way. And that's actually what I want to say. I know that China is embarking on huge, massive construction programs, has been doing so for a few years and still now is. And the very important thing is that what you build today will last for 50, 100, 200 years. But the software way of using it might change very rapidly because of technology in 5, 10, or 20. And so the very important thing is to see how we can future-proof it, and also how can we build something that could be adapted in an easy way to tomorrow. Thank you.